Welcome to MapleStory Worlds, home to custom-made experiences made by fans just like you. The MapleStory Maker engine opens up access to over 30 million MapleStory assets and the creative tools necessary to make bringing your ideas to life as simple and streamlined as possible. Our Maker tool comes with two editing modes, Design Mode and Pro Mode. Design Mode is our no-code editor that allows you to easily drag and drop preset assets with built-in behaviors so that you can focus on your creativity and leave the difficult details to us. Pro Mode, on the other hand, allows for full control and freedom over your world, provided that you're able to program the world on your own. If you haven't already gone through the Design Mode series, I highly recommend you take a look through the Design Mode series first before walking through this one, especially if you're new to MapleStory Worlds. I also encourage you to explore MapleStory Worlds as a player. Play through some of the worlds that others have made to gain inspiration for your own ideas. And once you've become familiar with world development and release your first world to Design Mode, then come back to this series to unlock the next level of your creative potential and walk with me through this series. I'd like to give a quick disclaimer that many parts of this video, especially text in certain menus, may seem small, so I encourage you all to view this series in full screen and the highest quality settings possible for the most optimal learning experience. And with that, let's begin. To create our Pro Mode world, we first have to set up our project. As we did in Design Mode, we'll navigate to the Create section. And before we click Create New, notice that we have the ability to create as an individual or as a group. If you have a team that you like to work with, you'll first have to create a group from the Creator Center web portal before you can create a world here. We won't go into group worlds in this series, as we'll be creating individually, but I encourage you to go through our guide pages on our co-production feature for further instructions on how to create a group. We'll click back on Individual and click Create New. And we're creative with our various templates, such as our UI packs, our asset packs, and various preset coding packs. We'll stick to our basics template and click Create New. Welcome to Pro Mode. If you're coming from our Design Mode series, you might feel a bit intimidated by the UI and tools you see on screen right now, but don't worry, by the end of this series, you'll feel right at home soon enough. Let's begin our first steps with scene navigation, and I want to bring your attention to the icons up top, starting with our selection tool, our panning tool, and our eraser tool. With the selection tool, we can select objects in our scene and drag them around. If we had multiple objects, we can click and drag to group them together and move them together as a group. With our panning tool, we can no longer select objects, but we can pan our scene view around. And with our eraser tool, we can erase objects in our scene. If we click and hold the eraser, we can choose to erase only tiles, so we can't erase objects anymore. Or we can choose to erase everything but tiles, so we can't erase tiles, but we can erase objects. Let's undo the damage we've done by clicking on the Undo button on the top left corner. We can of course redo, but let's keep it at this state. And let's go over some hotkeys. Ctrl Z to undo and Ctrl Shift Z to redo. We can use Q for our selection tool, W for our panning tool, and Shift plus E for our eraser tool. And we also have mouse and keyboard hotkeys, so if we press Q again for our selection tool, we can use our middle mouse to pan our screen around, and we can do the same with the arrow keys on our keyboard. And we can of course zoom in and out of our scene by using our middle mouse scroll wheel. Next to these buttons, we have the UI edit mode, so if you toggle this on, we can edit the UI in our world. We'll go into more on this a little bit later. We'll toggle this back off. And finally, we have our tile editor mode. So this will be familiar for those of you that have gone through our Design Mode series. But for those of you that haven't, I highly recommend you take a look through our Design Mode series on terrain editing to learn about the nuances of terrain placement and modifying terrain in your world. If you've played through some of the worlds in MapleStory Worlds, you might have come across some worlds with camera modes that are different from what you might be used to in MapleStory. This is where our various tile modes come into play, and this is a feature unique to Pro Mode. But if you click and hold our tile editor, we can see that we have Rectile and Side View Rectile modes in addition to the Maple Tile mode that we've been using in Design Mode and in Pro Mode so far. The Rectile mode is our top-down view mode that you might see in worlds like Soul Hero. And Side View Rectile is very similar to Maple Tile, except that you can import your own custom tiles for your own unique theme. Next, let's go over some of the panels that we see on screen here, beginning with the Hierarchy panel. The Hierarchy panel houses all of the assets contained within our world, things such as our maps and UI assets. If we expand our maps, we can see that we only have one map at the moment, and expanding that, we can see all of the assets associated with our map. Our scene view will render the currently active map. And if we had multiple maps, we would have to change the currently active map to have it rendered in our scene view. We can also render our UI in our scene view. And to do that, we have to toggle on our UI edit mode. And each UI has a group associated with it, and these correspond to the UI groups that we see down below. So if we wanted to modify our pop-up group, we would have to switch to the pop-up group. And to modify the toast group, we would have to switch to the toast group. Let's toggle our UI edit mode off again, and move on to the workspace. The workspace houses all the functional components of your world, and these aren't necessarily assets that we've added to our world. And they won't add any runtime load to your world unless you've added it to your hierarchy. So this kind of works like a toolbox. We have a couple tools in our toolbox. We have our default player, and these contain the settings for our character when they are spawned into the world. So if we change the settings here, such as the speed setting, they would make the character spawned on screen move faster. Our world config contains various settings for things such as security, legacy animations, and other settings that we won't go into this video, but certain guides or features may require you to modify settings in this section, so keep that in mind. We have two folders here, our base environment and our My Desk. The base environment contains scripts and models provided to you by MapleStory Worlds by default. So these are various components and models that have already been set up for you for use in MapleStory Worlds, so you don't have to write your own. The My Desk contains scripts and functional components created by you, the user. If we expand the My Desk folder, we can see that we already have some scripts in here, and this is because we've selected the basic template, which comes pre-packaged with some pre-written scripts provided by the template. Moving on to the property window, before I can explain the property window, I first need to briefly explain the concept of entities and components. We've been referring to a lot of objects here in the map, and these objects in MapleStory Worlds are known as entities. Entities are essentially containers in MapleStory Worlds, and the components are the functional pieces that make them run. So imagine a car. The outer shell of the car would be the entity, and the engine and other various elements needed for the car to function would be the components. The property window would show the components associated with the selected entity. So if we select our spawn location, we can see that we have a transparent component that contains the various positional coordinates. We have our sprite render component that renders our image on our scene view. Moving on to our preset list. The preset list contains pre-packaged assets with built-in functionality, so these aren't just images or sprites. Each asset contains functional components attached to that entity. So if you dragged in, let's say for example, this bunny here, this bunny already has various components attached to it. I encourage you to navigate through the preset list for various other assets that have been packaged for you, such as ladders, footholds, NPCs. We have portals here. We also have cool things such as fireworks and other particle effects. Moving on to our resource storage, these are all the collections of various assets available to you in MapleStory Worlds. This is different from the preset list as they are standalone assets not tied to components, so you would have to do that manually. The My Resources section houses all of the assets that you've uploaded to MapleStory Worlds, and the MapleStory Worlds resources houses the assets provided to you by MapleStory Worlds. Each of the panels that we described today can be organized and moved around, so if you don't like the way that my setup looks on my screen right now, for example, if I don't want this preset list to be here, I can drag it out and I can dock it to the property window. So we have our property tab and our preset tab kind of next to each other, so we have more space in our scene view. Okay, I want to walk you through a quick demo of world creation just to show you just how easy it is to get started in MapleStory Worlds without writing a single line of code and using only the tools provided to you by MapleStory Worlds by default. So I just have an empty map here and I want to create a second one. To do that, we're going to hold Ctrl, Alt, and 1 to bring up our map list. Alternatively, we can bring it up by going into Window and clicking Map List. We're going to click Create New Map to open up a second map. We're going to load it in just to see what's inside. Just another empty map, and we can see the contents of that map, but we can't see the contents of map 1. So scene 2 is currently rendering map 2, but we have to load map 1 back in to see the contents of map 1. So let's bring up our map list again and load in map 1. When our character first spawns into our world, it's going to spawn into whatever world is selected as a starting map. So we have map 1 set as a starting map at the moment, but if we selected map 2 as a starting map, when the character first enters our world, it will enter into map 2. I want map 1, so we'll set the starting map as map 1. And we'll close this window out. and we'll hold Control Alt and 2 to bring up our MapleStory map window. We can alternatively go into Window and click MapleStory Map to open up the map window. And this contains every single map in MapleStory. So I want to load in Maple Island and Maple Tree Hill. We'll click Load In, and it's going to warn us that it's going to overwrite the contents of our current map. That's fine. We'll click Yes. And just like that, Maple Tree Hill is loaded in with the NPCs, the ladders, all of the assets within this world, including the portal. We'll switch to map 2, load that in, and we'll bring up our MapleStory map window again. And this time we'll go into the world map. And this is just the exact same thing, but just a slightly different view. This is the view that you might be used to for MapleStory players. We will go into Victoria Island, and this time we'll load in, let's say, Spore Hill. And just like that, we have all of our mushrooms spawned in. And if I don't like any of these mushrooms, I'll actually delete this entire first row. We'll go into our preset list and search for a monster that we do like. I want this monster here. And then we'll move back to the first map because we want to connect the two portals together. So we want this portal to connect to the portal in our second map. So we'll go back to our second map to see which portals we want to connect. When we enter this world, I want them to enter through here, and we don't need any of these, so we'll delete these and delete this portal because we only have 2 maps right now. So we'll just go back and forth between this portal for map 2 and then go back through this portal for map 1. We'll switch back to map 1, save our changes, and select this portal. And in our properties, we have our portal component, and we have our portal entity ref. We'll select this dot here and select map 2 portal. Then we'll load our second map back in, save our changes, and then we'll click on this portal. We'll link the portal for map 1 in, and just like that, our 2 portals are connected. One last thing that I want to go over is our revisions. So as you're making progress and you make a big milestone in your world, you will want to have certain checkpoints so that you can go back to them. So if you ever make a mistake while you're developing and you want to go back to a previous working version, you will need to use what we call revisions. So we'll go into File and Revisions, and we will create a revision. And we'll make a note that set up 2 maps in our world. We'll click OK. And we've created our first revision. So if we ever need to go back to this revision after making additional changes, we can click Revert, and it'll load this map back in. All of the preset maps that we've loaded in are intended to have multiplayer functionality working right out of the box. So to test this, we'll click on Add Virtual Player. We'll press this button to load in our second virtual player. And we can see our second player moving and syncing. We'll move both characters out to the second map. And if I move to attack the monsters, we can see that attacking syncing is working as well. Also taking damage is also syncing. So if I take damage on one client, it shows up on the other as well. If I KO a monster, the monster disappears from both clients. Down at the bottom where we added our little alien squids, we can see that all of those have been loaded in as well, and I can attack those monsters and they disappear from both screens as expected. So multiplayer syncing is working right out of the box without us having to do any additional scripting on our side. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. Today we've done a quick tour of MapleStory Worlds Maker to go over creating new projects, navigating the editor, and even created our first map together. Next time, we'll dive into terrain, layers, and character movement to understand how we can give players the illusion of depth in 2D, and how our character will interact relative to those layers.